It was a grey October afternoon when Darren pulled off Interstate 74, his gas tank flirting with empty and his eyelids heavy from 5 hours on the road. He'd left a business conference in St. Louis and was en route to Indianapolis, a drive he'd done a dozen times. But this time felt different. The sky hung low with slate-coloured clouds, and the trees along the back roads were already skeletal, their leaves having scattered like forgotten promises. The air tasted of distant rain and dying crops, and even the birds had gone quiet. He wasn't one to pick up hitchhikers, not since the 90s when he'd once had a teenager try to rob him with a plastic knife. But when he saw the figure standing at the edge of the desolate two-lane road, head down, backpack at their feet, thumb out, it was the stillness that got him. No waving, no pacing, just a presence, like a forgotten statue waiting for someone to remember it. Darren slowed without thinking, his foot already easing off the gas before he realized it. His fingers hovered over the steering wheel. Something told him not to, but then something stronger said, "Just this once." Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was that strange loneliness that clings to middle-aged men on long drives. Or maybe it was that the boy looked young, too young to be out here alone. As the door swung open, the hitchhiker climbed in with practiced silence. He was in his early 20s, clean-shaven, with a blank expression and clothes a bit too thin for the cold. "Thanks," he muttered, without making eye contact. "Just need to get to Linton." His voice was steady, but there was something off. Too calm, too rehearsed. Darren noticed he didn't even ask where he was headed. Linton was only 20 miles away. Darren figured it would be easy enough. They drove in silence for several minutes, only the soft thrum of the tires filling the space. The boy didn't fidget, didn't check his phone, didn't look out the window. He just stared straight ahead. Then the boy spoke. "You ever get the feeling you're being followed?" Darren chuckled nervously. "Not since high school." The hitchhiker didn't laugh. "There's something back there," he said, voice flat. "Been trailing me since Shelbyville. Every time I look behind, it's closer, but I can't see it. Not really, just shapes, movement, like fog that pretends to have eyes." Darren glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing but the empty road. A lone crow circled above, vanishing into the cloud blanket. "You mean a person?" he asked. The hitchhiker shook his head. "Not anymore." He didn't elaborate. A cold shiver needled up Darren's spine. He tried to dismiss it. Maybe the kid was on something. He looked normal, but so did most crazies. Darren thought about pulling over, making an excuse, dropping him off early, but something in the boy's stillness, his unwavering tone, kept him frozen. "I shouldn't have gotten in," the boy whispered suddenly. "I think it's on you now." Darren's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. "Look, if this is some kind of prank..." "It's not," the hitchhiker snapped. "It's how it moves, from one person to the next, like a parasite, and I was running out of time." Something pounded against the trunk, a single, solid thud. Darren's heart leapt. He nearly swerved. "What the hell was that?" he asked. "It followed me," the boy said. "I'm sorry." His voice had cracked slightly now, like he regretted every word. Darren slammed on the brakes. The car skidded slightly on loose gravel. He turned in his seat. "Get out!" The hitchhiker didn't argue. He opened the door slowly, stepped out, and looked at the trunk. "If you want to survive," he said, "don't open it." Then he walked back into the woods, disappearing without a sound. Darren watched him go, watched as the darkness of the trees seemed to absorb him, as if he were never there at all. Alone now, Darren sat frozen. His eyes drifted to the rearview mirror again. Nothing. But the pounding started again, softer now, almost polite. Tap, tap, tap. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. The screen briefly flickered, then went dark. When he looked back up, he thought he saw something just beyond the trees. A figure, tall, still, watching. Then the locks clicked shut on their own, one by one. A soft, synchronized mechanical whisper. His breath quickened. Darren tried the door. It wouldn't budge. Something shifted in the back seat. He turned his head slowly. Empty. But the smell had changed. The air felt heavier, like a basement that hadn't been aired out in decades. Then he saw it. In the mirror. A shadow. It moved like smoke but had form. A face that wasn't a face. Hovering behind him. Watching. Its presence was undeniable. It wasn't on the seat, it was in it. Part of the car. Part of him. He screamed and scrambled to unlock the door. It clicked open as suddenly as it had locked. He fell out onto the gravel, heart pounding, lungs gasping. The cold air cut into his chest, but it felt cleaner than what he'd left behind. There was nothing behind him, nothing in the car, just silence. Until he looked at the trunk. It was open, wide, empty, or maybe not. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Whatever had been inside was now out. The drive to Indianapolis was a blur. Lights, road, trees, all bleeding into one another. He never picked up another hitchhiker, but sometimes, especially on lonely roads, he felt it again. The polite tapping, the weight behind his seat, the shadow in his rear view, and every time, without fail, it got a little closer, a little bolder. He'd start hearing breathing when the engine was off, whispers when he passed under flickering highway lights, and worst of all, he had started dreaming of it. But in his dreams, he was the one standing by the roadside, thumb out, waiting. If I hadn't left the office early that Friday night, I wouldn't be here trying to explain something that still makes my hands tremble. It was supposed to be just another long drive back to my quiet house in the countryside, away from city noise, emails, and people. But somewhere between mile marker 183 and 184 on that dimly lit highway, everything began to change. The rain had started to fall, thin, icy drops tapping like fingernails on the windshield. Visibility was poor, but not poor enough to miss the figure ahead. At first, I thought it was a bag or something left behind, but then it moved. A person, someone walking along the side of the road, hunched, soaking wet, and dressed in a dull grey hoodie that clung to their thin frame. My stomach turned with hesitation, but something, guilt or instinct, made me slow down. I was raised to help, always. I pulled over. The figure didn't look up immediately. They just stood there, unmoving, like they were waiting for me to decide. When the figure finally looked at me, it was a woman, maybe late 20s, maybe younger. Her face was pale, almost colourless in the glow of my dashboard lights. She didn't say much, just asked, barely audibly, "Are you going past Pine Hollow?" Her voice was almost drowned by the wind. I didn't know where Pine Hollow was, but I nodded. I didn't want to leave her in the rain. "Get in," I said, trying to sound calm. As she climbed in, something about her unsettled me. Not fear exactly, more like confusion. Her clothes were dry, bone dry, and she didn't carry a bag, not even a phone. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap like she was praying. "Thank you," she whispered again, and then said nothing else. We drove for miles in silence, the road stretching into darkness ahead, the sound of the rain like static on a broken radio. "Do you drive this way often?" she suddenly asked, making me jolt a bit. Her voice was clearer now, but still cold. I said I didn't, that I usually took the highway but had taken the back road this time to avoid traffic. She nodded slowly. "This road has history." I didn't know what to say. People say strange things when they're wet and alone, but she wasn't wet. That thought came back and wouldn't leave. I looked at her again. Her skin looked almost translucent. Her eyes didn't blink. I tried to keep calm. Maybe she was just in shock, or weird, or tired. "What happened on this road?" I asked, trying to break the tension. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. "People disappear here." I laughed awkwardly, expecting her to laugh too, but she didn't. She just turned her head slightly toward the side window, watching the trees blur past. Her smile remained. That's when I realized we hadn't passed another car in over 30 minutes. Not a single pair of headlights. Not even a gas station light in the distance. Just trees, darkness, and the sound of tires on wet asphalt. She spoke again, but this time it was slower. "I used to live near here, until someone offered me a ride." Goosebumps covered my arms. I felt like the air inside the car had dropped several degrees. "What do you mean?" I asked. She turned back to me. "He never made it out either." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, glancing at her now and then. Her face didn't change. No smile, no twitch, just eyes that stared, wide and knowing. "Do you know him?" she asked, tilting her head. "The man who picked me up. You kind of remind me of him." I forced a smile, swallowing down the rising fear in my throat. "You're scaring me," I said, half laughing. She didn't blink. "You don't need to be scared," she said softly. "It's already too late." The lights on my dashboard flickered once, then twice. I tapped them, pretending it was just an electrical issue. I needed to drop her off, anywhere, but every road sign we passed had the same name, Pine Hollow, over and over, like we were going in circles. I hadn't taken a turn. "Do you want me to stop the car?" I asked. "We can find a diner, somewhere warm." She cut me off. "They never found my body." I slammed the brakes. The car swerved slightly before stopping on the side of the road. "What did you just say?" She turned slowly toward me. "He buried me near the trees, just before the bend in the road." Her voice was emotionless, matter of fact, like she'd been rehearsing it for years. My heart was pounding. I opened the door and stepped out into the rain, gasping for air. My hands shook. I looked around. The forest was still, too still. When I turned back, she was gone. Gone. The passenger seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There were no footprints, nothing, just the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing. I climbed back in, checking my mirrors, the floor, the back seat. She was gone. I drove, fast. The road felt longer now, stretched. Every shadow looked like her, every bump, a body. And then I saw it, the bend in the road, and a small wooden cross, crooked, leaning toward the forest. A bouquet of dead flowers clung to it. I didn't stop. I didn't even blink. When I reached home, I locked the door, closed the curtains, and sat in the silence of my living room. But silence didn't come, because just past midnight, a voice whispered through the wall, "Thank you for the ride." It was one of those evenings when the air feels unnaturally still, as if nature itself is holding its breath. Jason Monroe, a 47-year-old insurance adjuster from Nebraska, was driving back home after a business trip in Arizona. His GPS had suggested a detour through a more scenic but less traveled state highway, a road that wound between desert plains and distant mountains. He wasn't in a rush, and the thought of avoiding traffic seemed appealing. He'd driven about 50 miles without seeing another car when he noticed a figure by the roadside, standing still under the fading light. A man, maybe in his late 20s, wore a black hoodie, jeans, and carried a small duffel bag. Jason instinctively slowed down. He had never picked up a hitchhiker in his life, but something about the stillness around him, the vast isolation of the road, and the man's fixed stare sparked an odd compulsion. The man didn't wave or even stick out his thumb. He just stared at Jason as if expecting him to stop, and Jason did. The moment the car halted, the hitchhiker opened the door and got in without a word. Jason cleared his throat awkwardly. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "North," the man replied, voice flat and eyes unmoving. "Anywhere farther from here." There was a long pause. Jason tried to make light conversation, but the hitchhiker offered no small talk, no name, just silence. Eventually, Jason gave up and focused on driving, but as night fell, a subtle anxiety started clawing at his chest. The man's presence felt heavier than it should, like a dense fog pressing into the passenger seat. After about 20 minutes, Jason noticed something peculiar. Every time he glanced over, the hitchhiker seemed to be staring, not at him, but at the dashboard, fixated. "You okay, man?" Jason asked, trying to sound casual. The man didn't blink. "Do you see it too?" Jason furrowed his brows. "See what?" The hitchhiker slowly turned his head to Jason. His eyes were pale, almost grey, and his face was devoid of emotion. "The thing that's been following me." Jason chuckled nervously. "All right, buddy, you're kind of freaking me out. Keep driving," the man said. "It doesn't like when we stop." Jason's mouth went dry. He looked in the rearview mirror, expecting nothing, but what he saw made his stomach drop. A shadow, too tall to be human, too fluid in its movement, was gliding along the road behind them, despite their speed. It was shapeless, yet it seemed to pulse like it was breathing. "What the hell is that?" Jason gasped. The man turned his head forward again. "It attaches itself to those who notice it. You picked me up. Now it knows you." Panic surged through Jason. He accelerated, but the shadow kept pace, dancing just out of the headlight's reach. "What is it?" he yelled. "I don't know," the man said. "It came after me 3 days ago. Everyone I talked to started seeing it. Then they disappeared." Jason's mind raced. "Then why the hell did you let me pick you up?" The hitchhiker didn't answer. They drove for hours. Jason couldn't bring himself to stop. He was drenched in sweat, his hands clenching the wheel until his knuckles turned white. Around midnight, his gas tank neared empty. He spotted a flickering sign, a small gas station. As he pulled in, the shadow vanished into the dark. Jason jumped out of the car and ran inside, dragging the hitchhiker with him. The gas station attendant, a gaunt man with tired eyes, stared at them like they were ghosts. "You saw it, didn't you?" he muttered. Jason froze. You've seen it too. The attendant nodded slowly. It's been around this stretch for years. Picks people off one by one. Always starts with a stranger on the road. Jason's heart pounded. How do you get rid of it? The man looked down. You don't. You pass it on. Same way he did to you. Jason turned to the hitchhiker, but he was gone. The man had slipped away while they spoke, and Jason knew in that exact moment he had been chosen. Now alone, Jason stood trembling in the flickering neon light of the gas station. He didn't want to believe it, but the weight on his chest, the feeling of being watched, it was real. The darkness outside no longer felt empty. He knew he couldn't go home, not with it behind him. He refueled silently, paid the attendant, and got back into his car. He drove for hours, not knowing where he was going, just desperate to stay ahead of the shadow. But deep down, he understood. This wasn't about escape. It was about delay. 3 nights later, a young woman driving through the same desert road pulled over for a man standing alone in the dark. He wore a suit soaked in sweat, eyes wide and hollow. "Please," he said, "I just need to get farther from here."